Welcome everyone to today's Social System Mapping Deep Dive session for October 16th, 2023. Your host today, as usual, are me, Christine Capra. I'm the co-founder of sumApp and Greater Than the Sum, and Kara Martner, who works with us at Greater Than the Sum to do lots of things, tech support, being our producer, communications, etc. So today's agenda is, this is going to be mostly a discussion today. We're going to do some chat intros in just a moment. I will do a brief introduction to social system mapping. We have a theory of transformation that goes along with it, which if you haven't seen it, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it today, but you keep your eyes out for an opportunity to see the theory of transformation if you get a chance. And then we're going to have a discussion about ways that values and or agreements might be incorporated into our maps. This will be an exploration. I don't have answers, but I have some questions and that I'm hoping you can all help think about. And then usually we have an optional half-hour session after the formal session is done. You know, people, we give our blessings to the people who need to go at the top of the hour, but then I stick around for an extra half hour for informal discussion or just answering more questions. We won't be doing that today. I'm recovering from COVID and I'm much better, but I still am trying to not overdo my energy, and I have a lot of meetings today, so I'm going to take a little bit of a break between. So let's go ahead and do some introductions in the chat. So if you just use the Slack chat and start with name, pronoun, location, and I'll just say this is an invitation. We would love to know these things about you, but if you're not comfortable answering anything or contributing in any particular way, don't feel like you're expected to. I'll just say, so today's topic is going to be it's not going to be super important whether you're super familiar with social system mapping or not, but I will just comment that these sessions are, a deep dive is somewhat built on an assumption that you're somewhat familiar with social system mapping. But like I said, that's not the important piece. What's important to know is that there are some people in this space right now, in this Zoom room right now, who are really familiar with social system mapping and have been around for quite a while and are quite versed in what we're doing. And then there are some people for whom this is a brand new thing. And because this is a public facing session, the people for whom this is a brand new thing are the priority. So even if you feel like, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, for those of you who are brand new, the invitation is for you to step in more than as much as you need to and are comfortable with and want to. I'm not going to call on anybody and make you feel uncomfortable, but I do want you to know that we're here. The people who are here most of the time have lots of opportunities to connect and to share their thinking. And so it's the people who don't have that opportunity that we really want to prioritize. Okay, so what's one primary, and also in the chat then, what's one primary network that you're part of or that you're working with? So we've got 3 people from the UK and Rainer from Germany and the East Coast of the United States and the West Coast. So that's a big range. It's great. Welcome, Vic. We are just in introductions. We've just gotten started. And so if you would like to unmute and just say a quick hi, just to do a quick mic check, that would be great. And then I'll pause and let you do that if you're going to. You were unmuted and now you're muted, just in case you thought the opposite. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. And so Vic, what we're doing is we're putting introductions in the chat. So if you would not mind, Did Vic disappear? Maybe he had the wrong link. Okay. Okay, so we've got,
I'm here now.
oh, okay.
Hey,
Hi,
I'm
Vic.
on an island in Greece. Signal is really bad. Bear with me.
Okay.
How are
We're
you?
used to that.
Good. Glad to be here.
We're glad you could join us. So we're in the chat. We're introducing ourselves, putting our name, pronoun, location in the chat, and then what's a primary network that you're part of or working with. Most people who show up in this space are doing some kind of work with some kind of transformational systems changey kind of network, and we'd love to know what that is. And I'm just inviting us all to take a moment to see what other people are working on if you haven't already. And then what brings you here today? What was it that drew you to this session, or what questions are you holding? And if you don't have an answer instantly, feel free to come back when one comes to you, if such a thing happens. Again, this is an invitation, not a command performance. Okay, so I'm just gonna well, as you continue with that, those of you who have finished that question, especially those of you who are new to this space or we haven't seen in quite a while, just really curious how you found out about this session and how you found out about social system mapping, whichever is easiest to answer. The conversation, meaning the conversation newspaper, in the UK. I didn't know that. I didn't know we were there. That's, if you have a link to wherever you found it, I would love to see it, because that's news to me. So Gus on an Eventbrite. Yep. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for that. So I'm going to just make a comment. For those of you who are new to this space and who are looking, interested in the specifics of what is social system mapping and how do I get started and the technology, my suggestion would be to go into Kara. Can you put a link to that list of Mary's use cases, so that so we do on the second Monday of every month, we do a thing called an on-ramp, and in the on-ramp we have mappers in our community share a social system map that they've made and sort of talk through the process a little bit, talk through their context and why they did it, share the map, what they've learned. And so we have dozens of them, I think. We have recordings of dozens of them. And so Kara's just put a link in the chat for you to sort of, Mary has done some work on categorizing them, saying what each map is about and who presented it. I would suggest starting there. Today's session is going to be a little bit more philosophical and about content of social system mapping as opposed to the how of social system mapping. So we'll try to weave in what's useful to you, but I just want to be clear that this is going to be more of a sort of a philosophical discussion. but there is that resource for lots of past session recordings. And then you can always join us, as Kara put into the chat. You can always join us for upcoming ones as well, and ask questions there as well. And usually I stick around for an extra half hour, which would also be a useful space for that. But as I said, I'm not going to today. Okay, but I will do a quick, I'm going to go back to my screen share. And just a quick what it is at a sort of higher level, what social system mapping is. This is not technical. It's not about how, but it's about really what. And so I like to say that social system mapping is really a mashup. It includes aspects of a social network analysis map, an asset map, concept maps, system maps, stakeholder maps. You could sort of roll in more kinds of types of maps even than that. If you like, today we're going to talk about mapping values. Maybe we can map values. So it's a mashup of all of those, and it will look on the surface, it'll look pretty similar to any of those kinds of maps. There will be dots and there will be lines connecting the dots. And so you might look at a social system map and think, yeah, I know what that is. I recognize that. And think that it fits in a category that you've already dealt with. And that may be true. And it also may not be true, because while a social system map is visually similar to all of these kinds of maps, it's different in some fundamental ways, which the biggest of which is simply that there's more in it. It's got dimensions of all of these kinds of maps. Usually these kinds of maps are a single dimension, so they're just looking at a social network analysis, or they're just looking at an asset map. In this case, we're piling a whole lot of stuff into there. It is ongoing, so the map evolves over time, that you can continually change, include more kinds of information, include new members, ask people to update changes to their network, to their relationships within the network. And so it's just, at its basic level, a lot richer, a lot more dense with information, and messier and harder to look at and understand what you're looking at the first time around. So, or it takes some getting used to. So that's what a social system map is at a very high level. It's also online and it's interactive, so you can slice and dice the data in different ways. It's accessible to the whole network, so the whole network, everyone who has access to the map is able to interrogate the data based on their own needs and their own curiosity. As I've alluded to, it's iterative, emergent, dynamic. And so we like to think of it not as an outcome or as a product, but as an ongoing collective practice. So again, it's more of a process than it is a product. And that ongoing collective process or practice starts right away. You can start this ongoing collective practice when you're at the beginning of before you've even made a map, in the design of the map. So you're going to get a little bit of a taste of that today at a beginning point. So why do we do this messy work? The why is to support systemic transformation. You all are part of a global movement to shift from, in some form, one specific way or another, systems of dominance, exploitation, and extraction, to systems of connection, reverence, and regeneration. And social system mapping's purpose is not to make a map. Its purpose is to support that shift. And so we're always thinking about how can we help support that overall shift from systems of dominance to systems of connection. And what we've learned about making that shift is that in the last 20, 30 years, is that supporting systemic transformation requires two things. It requires strong networks of wise change agents. So the network piece is one piece of that shift, and the wise change agents is the other piece of that shift. And another way I like to break it down is to say, okay, that there's two pieces to this overall movement that we're trying to generate, we're trying to support. And one of them is the relational shift. That's the network piece. That's the creating more belonging, creating more capacity to build trust and to listen, especially across diversity, creating more flow of information and resources at a network level, so that all of that is building strong relationship or building strong networks. That's a relational shift. And the other part of it is going from a separate self to a more porous, a more multiple understanding, and more interdependent, connected self. The other shift is what I like to talk about is the cognitive shift, which is going from a mechanistic worldview of just sort of thinking we just lay out a 10-point plan and everything will fall into place and we can just control everything, to understanding from more dimensions, that things are more, there are more causes and effects than we can control, understanding just greater complexity, and having, so in other words, going from a mechanistic worldview to a worldview that is about living or complex systems and understanding that and working with that, as opposed to approaching problems from that mechanistic mindset. So this is, if we think of this thing here in the middle, this cone, these are really the same thing, but depending on what angle we're looking at this cone from, or what angle we're shining light on it from, it can look very different. So we like to say that it not only can it look very different, but if we're looking at it from one angle, we obscure some of the realities of the other angle. So we need to go back and forth, look at it, look from relationally, look cognitively, look relationally, look cognitively, and these enhance each other. So the more the more strength we have in our relational capacity, the easier it is for us to go into the sort of sometimes scary world of complexity and not knowing things. But if we can lean on our relationships as we don't know things and as we get outside of our cognitive comfort zone, that makes us braver. And the more we understand complexity and the need for different perspectives and the need for building senses of belonging and trust, et cetera, the more we understand that from the perspective of not being mechanistic, but living systems, the better we are at doing the relationship stuff. So these just turn into a reinforcing feedback loop that make the whole system stronger. So in the end, we like to say that social system mapping, because of its complexity, because of its multidimensionality and its shifting over time, sort of forces you into that complex living systems mindset, because it isn't reductionist. It is, I mean, it's still it's not reality. It's a reduction of reality, but it's more complex than what we're used to dealing with. And it's very dimensional. And so it both helps us build relationships, but also helps us learn strategies for sense making and working together from a complex systems perspective as well. So social system mapping supports both of those shifts. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and introduce what we were going to talk about today. And so I'll just confess, this was not so this came up, this topic came up a month or two ago. We had one of our map presenters made a comment about wanting to map values in the context she was mapping, or it was values or agreements. I don't remember which, but when she said that, I thought, yep, I've seen places where people tried to do this, and I don't think we've nailed how to do it yet. And so I thought, well, let's just have a conversation about it. So so that's what we're going to do today. And I think what we're going to do is I'm going to pose some questions. I would like us to just all share our thoughts in the chat in writing, and then we'll sort of look through and find the most challenging or contradictory or juicy and unpack those a little bit. And then I want to share a little bit of my thoughts about where I've seen this before. And then I have some more questions. So that's our structure. And so the first question I had was just even the topic, the session description just came into my head, and I was like, values and or agreements, and that's what Kara ran with, of course, because that's what I gave her to run with. And then this morning I was thinking about the session, and I was like, but what's the difference between capturing values or capturing agreements? Like, what's the difference between values and agreements? And so I thought, let's start with that, because they're not, I don't think they're the same thing. And I think it would help us to think about the difference between them before we start thinking about how we could map them. So if anyone has thoughts about the difference between values and agreements, and what, yeah, let's start there. And yeah. Another thing I'll say is, then Amy, I'm gonna tell a mini anecdote that comes from you. I hope you're okay with that. At one time, Amy missed a meeting and watched a recording of it instead of being present at the meeting, and later said to me that it was easier and more relaxing for her to watch the recording than to be part of the discussion. And I was like, why do you think that is? And she said, because then I don't have to be always thinking about what am I going to say to the next thing, or like there's a question, what's my answer? Like I could just, I knew no one was going to ever ask me anything because that was a recording, and so I could just listen and pay close attention. So I realized that that's I notice myself sometimes when I'm in sessions like this, especially if I'm new, I don't necessarily want to say anything yet. So, or I don't have thoughts. So if you don't do anything, don't worry about it. It's not a pressure. And if you do, feel free. And I'm reading now what people are saying. Yep, values not necessarily shared, but agreements are. Values are how we behave. Agreements are what we intend. Interesting. Agreements are a product of thinking and communication. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing differences in between sort of well, I'm summarizing it in a being versus doing way. Agreements are things that have to do with our actions, our behaviors, and values are deeper and have to do with our being, and also about alignment, that it matters that we share agreements, but values might not have to be shared or might not be shared. Is there anything else that feels strong, that anyone feels strongly to call out from what we're seeing? You can feel free to unmute and chime in.
I like that note that Rebecca had about agreements being between people.
Yeah. Okay. Why? So here my next question is, why might we want, so it seems to me, if we, just when I was thinking about this, it seems to me that agreements, if there are agreements in a context there, and someone new is entering a context, the issue is, do they want to abide by those agreements or don't they? More so than what agreements are they bringing to the situation. Whereas values, so I was sort of seeing agreements as like not necessarily worth mapping because they should be givens and assumptions, and that's prior to mapping, maybe. But I want to, for today, I want to run with with values, because values seems potentially more challenging and more, I don't know, to me. And we can, anyway, because I don't think we can do both in depth. So I'm picking values. And so why might we want to capture values? Why? I mean, we all have them. They're very important. Understanding each other's values is very important. And Evan, feel free to just to jump off or just listen or just comment. That's not uncommon, and that's fine. That's still, you're still valued. Your presence is still valued. And but so what would we get out of putting values into a map in some way? How would that help us with those two shifts that I referred to? I love all these answers. Just this question is telling us a lot about people's worldviews, which I'm appreciating. Yeah. I really like Matt's, where'd it go? Matt's comment about values are the drivers of everything. And they are often invisible, and and we're trying with social system mapping to surface hidden things. And so that all feels really sensible. And I'm curious, so then there's one other question, and then we'll pause with this activity for a moment, which is, what would we be able to do with that information if it were in a map that we can't do already? And some of you have touched on that a little bit, but feel free to amplify. Mm-hmm. Okay, I was going to stop here and just tell a story about an experience I've had within the concept of social system, or the context of a social system map around values. And so I will do that, but I want to take a slight segue that I'm seeing. One of the values I have, and one of the values I think we are as a collective coming to adopt more is to explore tensions, to notice, surface, explore, and learn from the tensions that come up in our activities, in our planning, etc. And so, or to notice whether it's explicitly framed as a tension, but to notice where there is often there'll be like a lot of people saying things that are in alignment, and then someone saying something that feels very different from what everybody else is saying, and to notice that and to follow up on that and make space for that, rather than just say, okay, the majority think this is great, but this one person is having a problem with this. A big value for me is to go see what's going on, and to the degree that it is helping us to move towards our purpose, that needs to be unpacked or looked at. So I'm just doing an impromptu thing that I haven't chosen to do in this kind of a format before, but I'm noticing, Vic, you said a couple things. One was that this isn't the context, I'm not sure, this is not the format for this kind of conversation. And the other one had to do with AI and maps being static. And I'll just touch on the maps being static one, which is social system mapping isn't nearly as morphable as AI, but it's not static either. We do ask people to come back and update, et cetera. So I'm going to set aside the AI concept because I think that's too big for this conversation. But I'm really curious what you mean by this isn't the format for this kind of conversation. I would love to understand what that's about before we go further. If you're willing to share, if you don't want to, can't set aside AI. Are you able to unmute? Is that a possibility? I know you have low bandwidth.
Am I coming in?
Pretty fuzzy.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Let's see if it smooths out. Can everybody hear me?
People can hear you. I'm a little hard of hearing, and so it's a little fuzzy for me. So I'll do my best to follow. But
So what was your question?
so my
I'll
question,
try
the
to
big
address it,
question,
Christine.
the big question was why you're saying this is not the right format for this kind of conversation, what you meant by this kind of conversation, and why, and what you meant by this isn't the right format for that.
Oh, okay. So what's happening is in the collapse of a value set, and the value set is actually global now. It's not village or state. It's not even national. It's global. So when the collapse of a value set actually starts to accelerate, everything goes nonlinear, and conversations like this are linear, and we have to actually create environments within our conversations that allow for the nonlinear interaction. It's very, very important. And in mapping even is the issue about static versus dynamic, is that mapping holds a static, i.e. relative to a linear place. And what we need to do is actually create a dynamic environment that is ready for accelerated, unexpected change in milliseconds. So time cannot be a factor. It has to allow for full dynamic change in a space where everything is collapsing in order for the consciousness to actually emerge through that collapse and actually grab hold, so to speak, and create something new.
Yep. Thanks for sharing that. I personally, I'm not speaking for the collective. I personally agree with everything you've said. And at the same time, the context in which we are working is social system mapping. And so our context, our context is meant to be as supportive as it can be for as long as it can be, assuming that there will come a time when it will no longer be relevant or useful because of collapse, etc. I have that assumption that this is a temporary thing to help us move forward in certain ways. I certainly don't think it's the solution to, I mean, it's meant to be a kind of support for a while. And
we're well into the collapse, so
Pardon?
it's not going to work anymore. We have to come up with a new approach, and the work that you're doing is the foundation for that, but it can no longer work.
Yeah, and so when I approach a conversation like this, I hear people wanting to move into this space, and so can we map values? And then there's a part of me that's like, not enough, but at the same time, if it's an opening, and if we can have conversations, even in the conversation piece, this is what I'm saying about a social system map. If you have a conversation that helps a group of people understand something more deeply or get more comfortable with nonlinearity, and even if they decide, okay, that is not mappable, they've had that conversation and the map prompted that conversation. So I hold this stuff in that way as just one useful way for us to begin to explore this very complex nonlinear universe as a baby step. So are you okay then, Vic, for us to go forward? I want to share a little anecdote that sort of in a small way will amplify what you're saying, and then go on to some further ideas. In other words, are you okay for me to go back to the intended format? Vic. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and do that then, and hope that that Vic's okay. And okay, Vic's decided, or either his technology or anyway, I just and I'm going to notice and name, because I value noticing and naming, and I practice noticing and naming, that when there's like that difference, the different perspectives are super easy for me to follow. If it's a one-on-one conversation, you can take it anywhere, you can disagree all you want, and I will just go with you and listen and learn, and maybe we'll come to some shared understanding, and maybe I will just have learned some things about you. But in any case, I'm really comfortable with that. When it's in a group setting, I get really, like, my heart is pounding. My heart started pounding as soon as I saw that comment, and it's pounding because it's not just me and Vic, and I don't want to waste you guys' time in a conversation that isn't interesting and useful to you. Like, on the one hand, I want to explore the differences because we all need to understand other perspectives, and also not be in the habit of shutting out something that makes our heart pound, or shutting out something that feels like a threat. So I don't want to shut it out, but at the same time, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole that is specific to just one person and neglect the needs of the whole. And so I went back and forth about what to do. And then I said, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and do this and try to do it in a contained, limited way. So I am practicing and learning, and you all get to watch and have opinions if you want. Okay. Thanks, Tom. So thank you, Evan. I'm going to just share. Here's my personal brief story and gut level reaction. I made a map once with a group, and the group had chosen a small group of a much larger group, had defined like 8, I don't know if they were values or agreements, but they were 8 sort of things that they were wanting to say. If you're going to be part of this group, you need to be in alignment with these values or agreements. And they put it in a map so that the idea was you had to click on the ones that you were in agreement with. And if there were any that you were in disagreement with, there was a comment space for you to write in your comments about why you didn't agree. And what was like, I agree strongly, I kind of agree, but with qualifications, and I don't agree. And then a place for commentary. And so that was how they had set it up. And I'm putting myself on the map, and I'm looking at the map, and I'm trying to answer these questions. And for the most part, I felt like, well, I don't disagree strongly with any of these agreements, but they are a lot more prescriptive, or they are a lot more reductionist, and they're a lot more jargony. Oh, here Vic is coming back, and he then I was trying to answer the questions myself, and I found myself kind of conflicted, not because I didn't think that a network that espoused these values was a place for me. It's not that I felt like, oh, I don't want to be part of that because they have those values. It was more like, well, that's a set of values and or agreements that I'm certainly willing to conform to, but aren't how I hold them in my own heart at all. And I would be more nuanced. I would be in some ways more open about how those are expressed. And so I looked at these values, and what I ended up doing was just saying, I agree to all of them uniformly, and wrote nothing, because they're so, deeply, I mean, the values I hold very deeply, and they're usually very nuanced. And I have to write a book about each one. And so it was like, I'm just going to agree to all of them. But what I felt like then was that I was conforming in a way that felt to me like it was reducing my sense of my own authenticity in this context. Like, I am just pronouncing to the whole network that I 100% agree with all of these things, when if I looked at the comments of people who didn't agree and said, well, I don't agree because blah, 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 I'd be like, yeah, I agree with that too. So I agreed with I mean, I was.
Lost you, I'm back.
Pardon me? Vic, I'm sorry, you're sort of, I know you're having technical challenges. So I'm going to just proceed with this little anecdote. And so I felt really sort of conflicted and ambivalent about the whole concept, because the question for me is then, how can you do this not as a pronouncement that everyone's going to say, yes, I conform to, or I don't conform to, but how can we do this as an exploration? How can we do it without requiring a lot of writing? Because it was too much work for me. It was just like, I don't have the time and energy to expound on all of this stuff. So I'm just going to look like I conform. And how could it be done without implying an enforcement of conformity? So those are the three other questions I have that I thought would be really interesting for us to talk about today, is how could it be done in a mapping context, and could it be done in a map, not a discussion about what could we map. I can see how we could do that. We're working on that right now, but how could we map that in a way that is more of an exploration and less of a dictating? So that's my first question. We don't have that much time left. I kind of wanted to open this up as to just being a conversation, and at the same time, conversations are linear, and we only have time for so many people. And so I also want to just make sure everyone has the opportunity to contribute, even if we don't have that much time. So how about if whatever's coming up for you, there were 3 questions. if you have thoughts about those questions, put them in the chat, and I'll leave 3 minutes for that, and then we'll just chat verbally and try to make space for whomever. We'll do the hand raising thing for the verbal chatting. So
Sarah, are you able to put the questions in the chat? Or did I miss it?
she should have. So I'll just repeat them though. How could it be done as an exploration and not basically as a litmus test or a barrier? How could it be done without requiring a lot of writing? And how could it be done without implying an enforcement of conformity?
Thanks.
Because that business of difference is important. And if you just flat out say, we're all going to align to this and don't explore the differences implied there.
Christine, I'd love to jump in. I can't find the hand raise feature. I feel like it moved on my Zoom.
If you go to reactions. No.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there it is.
Okay, there. So I'm just going to leave silence for a couple minutes and then we'll start. Okay, if you want to continue writing in the chat, that's great. And Evan, you had your hand up first, so I'm going to call on you for your comments.
Yeah, this is really helpful. Putting language to the conversations that we've been having with the map commissioner, or like the kind of group that wanted to see this map happen and those involved. And as the map has grown, I think it started with a group that had shared values that were that weren't necessary to articulate, I think, because that was like who was already involved. And then, but the intention was always to grow. And part of that was to find and collaborate with people who have shared values, in which case being able to understand people's values was important, so that as they're added to the map, you can say, ooh, I want to collaborate with that organization. And I think what I'm seeing happening is that like the articulation of overall value, or at least initial values that shape the map, will end up being like a litmus test for inclusion, but it will be kind of self-enforced. Like if you learn about the map and you read about it, you might be like, I don't think I need to join this one if you don't share that value. Or if you do and you want to be on it, then that will be your way of like sharing that kind of overall value. And I'd say just one major value of transportation justice, with the justice being the important value that we would still need to articulate and is kind of articulated in the map intro. I wanted to call that out as like, not just within the map, but like the overall map itself, or like people who should have this shared value. And if you're not valuing justice, then you shouldn't be part of this mapping effort at all. And I think the other thing I already put in the chat about like, I think what the organizations on the map care more about once you're on it is less so the values your organization or coalition holds, but more how they're operationalized. And so the questions on the map for the profiles are more about your organization structure, your patterns of behavior, like what you do, and that's more explicit, easier to make inferences about too. Like, oh, if you do this, you probably care about that. So those are the two things I wanted to call out, and I'm really appreciating the language here and helping me see this in a new way.
Anyone else? Want to verbalize anything? I'm trusting that you're all looking at the chat so that you're seeing what each other's talking about. So I'm not seeing any hands raised. Mary, did you unmute because you wanted to say something?
Oh, no, I just was unmuted, but I wrote in the chat, it's hard to talk about this specifically without it being embedded in the whole context of what a person would share, their roles, their different things. But
yeah,
it seems like it would be part of the landscape, but sounds tricky. Yeah.
So I'm just going to go with one more comment, Tom. I'll let you comment, and then I have a teeny summary thing I want to say, and then I'm going to go to Rebecca. Can you do announcements? Are you willing? Okay, thank you. So Tom, go ahead.
Just as a practice, something we've been talking about or thinking about is expressing them as questions rather than statements, which kind of makes it more exploratory and gives room for agreement without conformity, so to speak. So that's just something we've been playing with, as it just even helps people think differently about it. So.
Well, so I'm just going to say, since it's time for us to wrap up, the one thing that I keep coming back to when I'm thinking about this topic is the concept that values drive everything, and we see the values in the patterns that we create. So even though, I mean, if you think of the iceberg, the values and the beliefs are at the very bottom, but the events and the patterns that are visible at the top. So I like to think about, okay, if we're holding these values, what would we see in our either how we identify ourselves or our actions or our focuses or our strategies? So Evan, for instance, like transit justice, it is a value, but it's also a thing people actually work on. It's a strategy. I mean, like, so you could just be asking, what are the issues that your organization focuses on? And then it's not saying, I mean, so that's at a different level. But how do we think about the deepest level, which, as Vic says, is mythological, and it is also, I think, very much self-identifying. Like, for me to adopt someone else's list of values just it's not ever going to work, because my identity is too wrapped up in my values, and my identity is too specific for anybody else's list. So how do we both try to understand and see people in this deeper way, but maybe not so need it to be absolutely direct, like overtly stated? So how can we sort of identify the patterns that the values would create, or the initiatives that they would create? In other words, just to connect the dots between the bottom of the iceberg, or that rooty thing, if you've seen that, up to actually what we can relatively easily refer to and talk about without being in a position of violating our own identity or conforming or mandating what's in people's hearts. And so agreements feel less deep, they feel very important. But the reason I went with values is because they're at the bottom of that iceberg thing. So I just wanted to say that I want us to think about the indirect stuff and how, because a map is not in person, is never going to be as rich and as robust. So how can we get deeper in surfacing what's hidden, but without expecting what's truly deep to be able to be put on a computer screen and interacted with in this very linear way. And I'm done, and Rebecca has 2 minutes to make announcements, and then we'll do our goodbye routine at the top of the hour.
Great. And wanted to let everyone know that on the 30th, in 2 weeks, we have a session, our quarterly community session, in which we are focusing on meeting each other as interesting people and finding other interesting people within our community of practice. So that's October 30th. November 6th will be a sense-making session focused on interpreting what's within the map. And the 13th will be another on-ramp session. So also, we're always encouraging each other to join the community of practice map, or if we're already in it, to hop back in and update our information to keep it dynamic. And back to you, Christine.
Very good, Rebecca. Thank you for that. So we have for those of you who haven't been with us before, and there's a number of you who we haven't heard from, and I'm hoping that you got something that you needed. And if you didn't, that you either come back or even just ping me, email me, and tell me what you didn't get, and I'll see if I can point you in the right direction or be supportive in some way. At this point, we just will all unmute, and I'll count down 3, 2, 1, and then we just all jump off. Before we jump off, we give each other our blessings, our wishes for the day, and then we'll all jump off together. So for everybody, go ahead and unmute if you want to do this with us. And I'm going to go ahead and count 3, 2, 1. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
I hope you have a wonderful
Everyone.
rest of your week.
Everyone. Bye, Matt. Good
Bye.
to see your face.
Bye-bye.
Bye.